Pat, thank you so much for coming onto my program. So you don't believe Maddie McCann was abducted?
Let me put it this way. One of the jobs of a criminal profiler is to analyze the evidence, do the crime scene analysis, and let the evidence speak for itself, in other words. So you're looking at the evidence and you're building what does the evidence tell you. And at this point in time, which now has been, I guess I've been looking at this case for almost as long as the case has been around, which is now 10 years, I have found no evidence of an abduction. There's certainly nothing that supports that evidence physically or behaviorally or circumstantially, absolutely nothing. The only thing you could even say, even you could think the child could have been abducted, is the simple fact that she's missing. And that's it. And that is actually the only piece of, quote, evidence she's missing. But there's a lot of evidence in another direction, and that is what has been really suppressed a lot in recent years by the UK press and by the US press as well.
So what do you think has happened to Madeleine McCann?
Well, when Gonzalo Amaral, if you're familiar with him, he was the detective on the case. After he analyzed the case, he put out a book called Truth or the Lie, which he theorized that the parents were involved in essentially when they left their children alone, that Madeleine came perhaps through medication, was somewhat drowsy, got up out of her bed, climbed on the sofa, and fell behind the sofa in an accident. And that in a desperate attempt, panic, the parents covered up this particular incident as hoping that it would be seen as an abduction as opposed to an accident resulting from neglect. And he put the book out to that effect. The McCann sued him and had his book taken off the market. It went through the courts for many years and now has gone all the way to the Supreme Court of Portugal, and they have ruled in his favor. And they even came out and said the McCanns have never been cleared. You know, that has been something that's been out in the media for a long time. No, they were cleared. They're not. And the Portuguese judge said very clearly, no, that is not true. They have never been cleared. And when I came into the case and I looked at analyzed all the evidence, physical evidence, behavioral evidence, circumstantial evidence, I came to the same conclusion as Gonzalo Amaral. We have a few differences in little bits here and there, but I do support his conclusions. We have another gentleman out of Portugal now who's speaking up, another crime analyst, Mr. Flores, who also supports those conclusions. So it's not only one person who believes this, that the evidence supports that the parents might be involved in what happened to Madeleine, but quite a few experts in the field.
So do you think she died in her hotel room?
Well, first of all, we have the cadaver dogs and the blood dog, and they hit on the flat of the McCanns behind the sofa. There's a number of issues. I want to point out something very important, that when you're analyzing evidence, it's not one piece of evidence that you just don't want to say, oh, look, the dogs are hit behind the sofa, therefore, this is what happened. That's not what you do. You look for the totality of evidence. So it's all the pieces of evidence put together that lead you to believe a certain thing happened. There were some issues about the possibility of Madeleine being given some kind of sedative and her brother and sister being given some kind of sedative so that the parents could go out and spend more, not worry so much about the children being alone in the flat. And that is another piece of the puzzle that is very interesting. So, yes, it appears to me the evidence supports that something occurred. There was an accident while they were not there, and therefore, Madeleine expired in the apartment.
Was there any blood tests taken on the three children to find out whether there was any sedatives used, any drugs in their system?
There were certainly none done at the time, unfortunately, because nobody was thinking that direction.
That seems so obvious.
Well aware. It isn't so obvious. When you're people a lot of times like to say, oh look, the detectives screwed up the case. I thought the Portuguese detectives did not mess this case up. They worked very hard at it. But here's what happens: you arrive, you get a phone call of some panicked parents that their child is missing. The first thing when you get there and everybody's running around in total panic and crying and the child is not there, you want to save that child. The 3-year-old child just gone missing. You want to save that child's life. You're going to try to find that child. And so the first thing you're going to do is, if you're going right at the premise, right at the start, that the child must have been abducted, you're going to try to find that a person who's taken her, because you know very well, if you've been in this business any length of time, if a child is kidnapped at that age, it is almost always a child sex predator who is going to rape and kill that child within 3 hours. Because none of those type of people keep the kid around. A teenage girl's different matter. You can put her in the basement and tie her up and keep her for months. But nobody likes to be around a little toddler. Even parents can't stand being around a toddler sometimes. Yeah, they whine, they cry, they want food, they have bathroom problems. It's difficult. So a child sex predator, it sounds horrible, but once they're done with what they think is fun, they kill the child because they don't want to deal with the child, and they want to get rid of the evidence quickly and move on. So the detectives know we only have a couple hours to save this child's life, if that. So they're going to race out and do what they can to find that child. And during that time, evidence can go missing, things cannot happen in a certain way, and it takes a while sometimes after they start interviewing everybody later as to what happened that night, can you tell me where you were? And they start getting all that done. Then they start having some concerns that, maybe it wasn't an abduction. Maybe something else is going on here. Some pieces of the puzzle don't make sense. Some of the statements that they're saying are concerning. And then they started, this is what happened with the Portuguese police, then they started looking at the parents. But, a lot of time had passed by then. And so it gets more difficult. The more time passes, less likely it is one can solve a case. Well, let me put it this way. You can solve the case, but you can't prove it in a court of law. Completely different thing.
Where do you think Madeleine's body is?
Well, if the McCanns were involved, and I say if because people will say, oh, you're saying the McCanns are guilty. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the evidence that, as I have analyzed the case, supports that there was an accident that was covered up. And if this is so, the most likely place I've found so far, there was a location west of Praia de Luz where the McCanns, Jerry McCann's phone pinged. And this was during the time that they had a rental vehicle. And that rental vehicle was also hit on by the dogs. The dogs hit on the boot of the car, which is why people believe that it's possible that if the McCanns were involved, her body was taken one place, and then a number of weeks later, when they were concerned that her body might have been found in that location, moved the child's body to a more secluded location. And this is what I have looked at. There is a place that is just west of Praia de Luz where the phone pinged, which is very desolate. And I have Monte Jose. It's very hard for me to Mestre, I believe it is. I can't even pronounce it. It's Portuguese. And it's just an isolated area with bushes and such. And you could go back there and you could dig holes and nobody would ever find anything. So I've always wished they would look in that area, but, we have seen no effort by Scotland Yard to even look at the parents in this particular case because, they came into this with this is one of the things that really boggles the mind. Anytime you look at a cold case, when I'm brought in by police department to look at a cold case, I start at the beginning. I don't start with a supposition that this is what happened. Yeah. I mean, why am I being brought in if I'm going to do your job? You've already done that. Why should I come in and just continue? If you're bringing me in as a fresh pair of eyes, I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to reanalyze the case. Everybody's a suspect until I am able to exclude you. That's where Scotland Yard should have started if they were legitimate. But they came in saying, we're here to the remit. They actually had a remit that said, we're going to analyze this case as an abduction, and the McCanns are not suspects, period. From the beginning. And from that moment on, they've spent 6 years, almost $18 million in U.S. money, getting absolutely nowhere. Have not come up with a shred of evidence to support an abduction or a shred of evidence to link anybody to the crime, any stranger to that crime. So maybe they're going down the wrong road because that was the road they planned to go down. And
so you believe that Scotland Yard bungled the case. How could they possibly now turn around and, I guess, follow your theory? It would just be the biggest embarrassment, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't think they bungled it. I think it purposely did not analyze it. And this is one of the biggest mysteries of all because I've never seen any department spend this much money not handling a case properly. I mean, there's always little political things that go on, and sometimes you see that, they realize, well, it's too late to solve this case. We'll just go through the motions and show that that happens. That happens quite often, but not this kind of money being spent. I mean, we're talking about 6 years and a dedicated force to investigate the disappearance of one child who was likely dead within the same night she went missing. So we're not even looking for a live child. We're not trying to save somebody's life. We're simply trying to find out what happened and prosecute the right person if they were involved. So to turn around now, I mean, unless they're willing at this point to go back to the beginning and do a crime reconstruction, get the McCanns or their friends there, start over, start by analyzing everything, doing a reconstruction of the crime, and then re-interviewing everyone and focusing that direction, that would be the only way. Because they're going to need, at this point, a body or a confession to be able to help the Portuguese go to take this to prosecution. You can go on a very circumstantial case right now. It would be really difficult to do, especially with Scotland Yard touting this abduction theory for 6 years and pretty much saying, they looked at every single person in Portugal and some people in UK as well, and then come back and say, oh, it's the McCanns. I mean, that would be pretty difficult to do. So they're going to need, if they go in the direction of investigating the McCanns and it turns out the McCanns have anything to do with it, they're going to need confessions, and they're going to need a body or to be able to prove anything.
So if there was a ping at the location and the dogs also paid significant attention to the boot of the car, and you're talking about possible sedatives in the other children's bodies, is there possibly a cover-up happening right now?
Cover up by whom?
Well, is Scotland Yard trying to cover up some huge mistake?
This is probably, in my opinion, more of a mystery than the actual incident of Madeleine going missing. It's why have the McCanns gotten such an incredible amount of support from the government? And I honestly do not have an answer to that. There are many, many theories out there now. People are looking at that there was some kind of a big sex ring, a pedophile ring that's connected to the government. A lot of people believe this because of the level of support they've gotten from the government agencies. Now, I personally, look back at that crime scene and I come up with the most likely conclusion is an accident that was covered up. So I don't see that, but I cannot answer as to why they've gotten the level of support they have. I mean, if truly, if they've lost a child and they weren't connected in any way outside of neglecting their children, because they did indeed leave them unattended, which was neglect. You could feel sorry for them and want to give them some level of support, I suppose, but the level of support they've gotten is unprecedented in the world as far as a missing child case goes. I mean, they have a fund that they set up. It wasn't even charitable. They got a tremendous amount of millions of dollars from people, good-hearted people who sent them money to find Madeleine, and that some of that money has been used for suing people. So which is it's incredible in itself, and for also hiring private detectives who were incompetent and somewhat criminal. I don't even know why they would not have searched out good detectives, through missing children's agencies, somebody who was really skilled at it. So that whole thing was bizarre as well, and the amount of the fact that they have sued people. They sued Gonzalo Amaral. They sued Tony Bennett. They went after Amazon and got my book removed from the Amazon market by threatening them with a lawsuit through their lawyers, Carter Ruck. They've done this with many people, and yet they still get a tremendous amount of support from the media, who no doubt is quite afraid of the litigation, and from the government, who you wonder why are they getting this level of support when there's so many other parents of murdered and missing children who don't get hardly any support at all, and very little money put toward continuing an investigation, probably cases which are much more likely to be solved and much more likely to bring anybody to prosecution than if Maddie McCann was truly abducted 10 years ago and, like I say, likely killed immediately. So Why have they gotten this support and why have they gotten this level of money? I have no idea. And I say that's the biggest mystery of all.
Well, just a few hours ago and earlier in our interview, you touched on Flores, who was a detective, a Portuguese expert as well, who agrees too that what you've just said, that Maddie was in fact dead in the hotel room. A few hours ago, the Sun newspaper's headlined read, "Sick Maddie claims Portuguese expert launches vile attack on Kate and Jerry McCann over their daughter's disappearance. Morita Flores says he has no doubt Maddie died inside the holiday flat." So there is support there for the claims that I guess both you and Flores have come to. Are you expecting to get that backlash as well?
Yes, you'd actually expect that. I've been called a troll. I've been called vile. Yes, I've been called all of those things. And it's interesting because, it is simply purporting a theory. And Jerry McCann himself stood up in the courtroom and under oath said, I don't have a problem with somebody purporting a theory. Well, apparently it does if the theory is an abduction. But, we are crime experts. Gonzalo Ramos is a crime expert. I'm a crime expert, and so is Mr. Flores, crime experts. And we have analyzed evidence, and we have based our opinions on that. And so even if one disagrees with someone, an expert's opinion, and our opinions can be disagreed with. I'm reasonable enough to think there could be somebody else out there who thinks, well, Pat Brown, I've also analyzed the evidence, Pat Brown, and I disagree with you. And you see this in a court of law where you have experts for the prosecution, experts for the defense. So, it is not inconceivable that somebody can disagree with it. However, how does presenting a theory based on evidence? And when I wrote my book and all of my blogs, I have detailed many, many pieces of evidence, physical, behavioral, and circumstantial, many, many pieces of evidence, the totality of all this evidence to explain why I come to these conclusions. So it's not a matter of just making stuff up or just being mean, I just going to say terrible things about these people. I have no interest in doing that.
Pat, tell me why you don't. Pat, tell me why you don't think a child sex ring is involved.
That is probably the worst excuse for what could have happened to Madeleine McCann. Sex rings have gotten a little overblown, shall we say, in the news, and not because they don't exist, and not because they're not terrible things, but the way they operate is not the way people think. Most child sex, for example, sex trafficking rings, most sex trafficking rings are with teenage girls. They are homeless girls. They're girls who are getting into drugs, or girls who are in dangerous situations, run away from home. They're lured by pimps. We used to just call them pimps and prostitutes once upon a time. But now we call them sex traffickers because, it actually was once used as a legal term in order to be able to get better charges across state lines in the United States. And then it turned into, we'll call everybody a sex trafficker. And so it makes people think that these sex traffickers are running around kidnapping people off the streets, kidnapping teenagers, kidnapping children. And I will say that in certain countries, yes, children are kidnapped, very, very poor children usually. Sometimes children are sold by the parents into sex trafficking because the parents can't feed their children. So there are children who definitely are taken advantage of. There are parents who just want to abuse their own children and will, offer their children for child pedophile rings, for example. However, what sex rings don't do is go to a location and kidnap a coerced child, which will launch a huge police investigation. When they don't need to do that. When there's so many other little children they can grab and no one will even notice. The last thing you want to do is
draw attention to the ring. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there's too many other children out there you can get for really, really cheap and really easy.
And you also said that the window in the hotel room wasn't conducive to dragging a child out. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about the totality of the evidence, and it's really hard to explain in one interview here how all the pieces go together. But first of all, I believe that the actual apartment was locked down. I don't believe anything was open. In the beginning, it was said by the McCanns that the shutters were jimmied, somebody had, used a tool to open them. That was not true. Absolutely not true. Proven not to be true. So there was no evidence of anybody sneaking into the apartment or carrying the child out of the apartment. Nothing was disturbed in any way. Nothing was disturbed outside the window, on the window, inside the window, in the room. Nothing. So there was no evidence of a stranger ever accessing that apartment. So, it's one of the reasons there's no sign of an abduction.
What do you think will happen now, Pat? You're a very experienced crime expert. Will authorities listen to your claims, to your findings?
People don't. It's not usually the way authorities work. I mean, especially at this point in time, what happens is the longer anything like this goes on, very difficult to backtrack, very difficult to go to court when you've kind of done what you've done already. I say there is the smallest possibility, and I don't have great hope for that at some point, yes, the authorities could go back and say, hey, we're going to go back and reanalyze and do the crime reconstruction and re-interview. Perhaps if they got enough pressure from enough experts in the media finally breaking this open, where the fear of speaking about this particular case disappears. Remember, most people won't even talk about this. I know that whenever I've spoken up, written anything, I immediately get emails and people saying, oh, be careful. Aren't you worried about, you're going to get sued? Aren't you scared? And my answer to them is no, I'm not, because I stand by what I say, because I'm basing everything on evidence, and I'm not saying my clients are guilty. I'm simply saying the evidence that leads to a theory based on evidence does lead away from an abduction and leads toward neglect and an accidental death and cover-up. So that's not libelous. That's an opinion based on evidence. And but yeah, at this point in time, I would be pretty shocked. Who knows? I'd be happily shocked if I saw more progress on this case. I think what we're more likely to see is this case simply wrapped up. They supposedly the Scotland Yard is supposedly running after one last person again. Some guy worked at the resort, which again, there's no evidence pointing to anybody who worked at the resort. So why are you looking at this person? But so I think it's going to eventually be wrapped up. Whether they're going to wrap it by saying we could not, we have our theories, but we couldn't prove it. We couldn't prove these particular men or whomever were involved in the abduction and whatever of Maddie, or whether they're going to say the dead guy did it. It's always useful if you have a dead guy. You can just say he did it. We know he did it, but we can't. He's already dead, so we can't prosecute. I think it's going to eventually got to be wrapped up, and then they'll just remain that way unless somebody comes forward and confesses, or unless Maddie's body happens to be found. And in that case, things could change.
Pat Brown, thank you so much for joining us. It's a shocking case and it's a baffling case, and it sounds like it's going to go on for some time, but we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me on.